The sun was melting into the Sacramento skyline, casting long golden shadows across the city's tired streets. In one of those shadows, a man sat alone in his car, his suit crisp, his mind calm. He was headed home. But a flash of red and blue behind him turned that quiet drive into something far more dangerous. The officer thought he'd pulled over just another black man in a nice car. He didn't know that the man in the driver's seat was the head of internal affairs. And before this night ended, that badge on the officer's chest would never feel the same. Before we begin, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? This is a story you'll want to watch to the very last second. Eric Porter wasn't in a rush. The hum of his sedan was soft, and the jazz playing from the radio helped smooth the edges of another long day. He adjusted the air conditioning, glanced at the sun setting like a slow-burning ember over Sacramento, and let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He was almost home. The light up ahead turned yellow. He eased off the gas, letting the car roll to a clean stop before it turned red. And that's when he saw it, red and blue lights in his rearview mirror, swirling like a storm. His brow furrowed. No screeching tires, no reckless moves, no reason. Still, Eric did what he always did. He complied. He pulled to the shoulder, rolled down his window, and waited. The cruiser behind him idled for a beat longer than usual, as if the officer inside was gathering himself for something more than a routine stop. Out stepped Officer Bradley Larson. Buzz cut. Late 30s. The kind of swagger that said he liked being in charge, needed it even. He walked up with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, thumb resting on his belt like it was holstered justice. "License and registration," he barked. Not a greeting. Not even a glance that said this was just procedure. Eric handed over his papers without a word, his movements smooth, his face unreadable. He'd been through this before. Too many times. Larson studied the ID like it didn't belong to the man holding the wheel. Like Eric had borrowed it from someone who fit the picture better. "You from around here?" Larson asked, voice flat but laced with suspicion. Eric's answer was calm, precise. "I moved here a few months ago. The address is on the license." But that wasn't what Larson was really asking. His tone suggested something else entirely, something unspoken but unmistakable. He wasn't looking at a driver anymore. He was looking at a problem he'd invented in his mind. Larson's posture shifted. His eyes scanned the car like he was building a case, one mental brick at a time. "You didn't come to a full stop," he claimed. "That's why I pulled you over." Eric blinked slowly. "I believe I did slow down in time, but I understand." There was nothing to fight. Not yet. But Eric could feel it, the energy changing, thickening like storm air before the rain. Larson wasn't here for a warning or a ticket. He was here to make a point. And Eric knew it. Larson tucked Eric's license into his chest pocket with theatrical slowness. "Step out of the car for me," he said. Eric's grip on the steering wheel tightened for a breath. His eyes didn't flinch. "Is there a specific reason for that, officer? You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." It was always the same line, the same performance. But this time, the stage was different. Because the man standing in the spotlight didn't just know the script, he wrote it. And Officer Larson had no idea who he'd just pulled over. Eric stepped out of the vehicle with the kind of precision that didn't come from fear, it came from experience. His movements were fluid, deliberate, not an ounce of wasted energy. He was taller than Larson, but he didn't tower. He didn't puff his chest or challenge. He simply stood. Grounded. Centered. Present. Larson didn't like it. There was something about a man who didn't flinch when challenged. Something about the quiet dignity in the way Eric carried himself that didn't fit the picture Larson had painted before he even turned on the sirens. In Larson's eyes, this was supposed to be easy. Quick. A mark. A warning. Maybe a citation. Maybe more. But now the silence felt like judgment. "Hands where I can see them," Larson said, his voice clipped, a notch louder than before. Eric complied. Palms out, arms slightly raised. He even offered a faint nod, the kind that acknowledged the absurdity of it all without inflaming the fire. "Is there something specific you're looking for, officer?" Just routine, Larson replied, but the smirk on his face betrayed the truth. This wasn't routine. Not for him. We've had some incidents around here. Can't be too careful. Eric's gaze didn't waver. Incidents involving men in business suits driving sedans? The question was simple, but the way it landed was heavy, like a gavel in a courtroom where truth had finally shown up. Larson took half a step forward, his hand hovering near his belt. Watch your tone. Eric didn't blink. I'm simply asking for clarity. I believe in transparency. You know, something law enforcement encourages in theory. For a moment, Larson just stood there, frozen between the instinct to dominate and the reality he couldn't quite put a name to. He didn't know this man. Didn't understand why the usual routine was unraveling. Eric wasn't playing the part. He wasn't apologetic. Wasn't angry. Just composed. That's what rattled Larson the most. You seem awfully confident, he muttered, more to himself than to Eric. Like you know what's going to happen next. Eric tilted his head slightly, as if considering the comment. Confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is. The air between them shifted again. Sharper. Thicker. This time, Larson's face gave it away, his jaw clenched, a flicker of heat behind his eyes. And that's when he made his next move. Turn around. Place your hands on the hood. I need to check for weapons. Eric raised an eyebrow. Weapons? He almost sounded amused. Do I look like someone who's carrying a weapon? I'm not going to ask you again. There it was, the threat, thinly veiled, perched on the edge of his voice. But Eric didn't resist. He didn't argue. He turned and placed his palms flat against the warm metal of his car's hood. Larson's boots scraped the asphalt as he moved in for the search. His hand swept over Eric with a force that was more about control than caution. Longer than necessary. Ruder than required. Still, Eric didn't move. Didn't stiffen. Didn't give him what he wanted. You're clean, Larson muttered, stepping back. Eric turned slowly to face him. Of course I am, he said, his voice smooth, like silk pulled tight. Now, if you're finished. I'm not finished, Larson interrupted. His voice cracked, just slightly. You seem to know an awful lot about what I can and can't do. Care to explain why? Eric folded his arms, his posture relaxed even as the tension between them simmered. Let's just say I've had my fair share of experience with law enforcement. I've learned a lot over the years. Larson narrowed his eyes. You a lawyer or something? Eric smiled faintly. Or something. The ambiguity stung more than any insult. Larson took a step forward, trying to reassert dominance. You think you're smarter than me, huh? Eric didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was the loudest statement of all. Because in that moment, the power had shifted. And Officer Larson, for all his authority, was starting to feel it slip. Officer Larson's hand hovered near his belt, not in the way a man reaches for his tools, but in the way someone grips a lifeline when they realize the tide's turning against them. The badge on his chest still shone, but its weight seemed to grow heavier with every second that passed. He looked at Eric Porter, measured, calm, unmoved, and felt something he didn't often feel during a stop, unease. Eric didn't back away. He didn't raise his voice or square his shoulders. Instead, he held Larson's gaze with a calm so steady it bordered on surgical. I don't think I'm smarter than you, he said, his tone razor-sharp without needing to cut. I think I've spent my life studying what happens when power is handed to people who never learned how to carry it. Larson's lips parted, but no words came. You said I seem confident, Eric continued, stepping slightly closer, just enough to shift the dynamic without breaking the boundary. But this isn't confidence, officer. This is clarity. Larson's voice finally returned, rough around the edges. You think fairness is what this is about? His tone rose with frustration. People like you always. He stopped himself. But it was too late. The words had already slipped into the space between them like smoke. Eric didn't flinch. People like me? Larson tried to recover, but his composure cracked at the edges. You know what I meant. I do, Eric said softly. And that's the problem. For a long, stretched second, neither man spoke. A passing car slowed behind them, its driver craning their neck to take in the tension unfolding on the side of the road. But neither Larson nor Eric noticed. They were locked in something deeper than confrontation. It was revelation. Then, with quiet precision, Eric reached into his pocket. Larson's hand jumped toward his holster. "Hey, what are you?" "I'm reaching for my badge," Eric said evenly, eyes never leaving Larson's. Slow and deliberate. No surprises. Larson hesitated, watching every inch of movement like a man waiting for a trap to spring. Eric pulled out a black leather wallet, flipped it open, and held it up. The gold emblem glinted in the fading light. "Eric Porter," he said. "Head of Internal Affairs. Sacramento Division." The wind seemed to still for a moment. Larson stared at the badge, then back at Eric, as if trying to will it into being fake. But it wasn't. There was no bluff here. No trick. Just truth, and it hit harder than any accusation. "Your Internal Affairs?" Larson's voice was a whisper now. "Yes," Eric replied. "The office that investigates misconduct. The one that reviews complaints about officers who use authority as a weapon, not a shield." Larson staggered back a step. His hand dropped from his belt. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Eric closed the badge wallet and returned it to his pocket with the same calm that had carried him through the entire encounter. Then he spoke again, his words slow, intentional. "Do you know what the most disappointing part of this interaction has been?" Larson blinked. "It's not the profiling," Eric said. "Though that's bad enough. It's not even the search, the escalation, or the smugness. It's that you had no idea who I was, and still treated me this way." Larson swallowed hard. "You assumed I wouldn't know my rights," Eric continued. "That I wouldn't challenge you. That I'd just take it. Because I didn't fit your mental image of someone deserving respect." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was damning. Eric took a slow breath. "I oversee your department's ethics. I write the reports that end careers. I'm not saying this as a threat. I'm saying it as a mirror." Larson looked down, suddenly finding the cracks in the pavement more compelling than the man in front of him. "I don't carry anger," Eric added, his voice lowering. "But I do carry accountability. And so will you." Then, without a single raised voice, without a single aggressive move, Eric Porter turned and walked back toward his car. He didn't need to look back. He already knew the weight of truth was finally heavier than the badge. Eric slipped back into his car with the same calmness he'd maintained since the stop began. But inside, his mind was anything but still. As the door clicked shut behind him, he exhaled, not from relief, but from resolve. Larson was still standing outside, frozen, the authority that once cloaked him now frayed and see-through. Eric started the engine, the soft hum of the sedan resuming like a heartbeat returning to normal. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And both men knew it. Through the rearview mirror, Eric could see Larson pacing slightly, his eyes darting to the side like a man trying to script his next move before the consequences arrived. The glow of his cruiser's lights flashed across the car's interior in soft, rhythmic pulses, like an alarm no one could hear but everyone felt. Then Eric reached for his phone. He didn't call his wife. He didn't call a lawyer. He called the assistant to the chief of police. "Put me through," he said, his voice even, his tone stripped of emotion but full of purpose. Less than a minute later, he was speaking to Chief Daniels directly. "I need to brief you," Eric said, "about an incident that just happened. It involves Officer Bradley Larson, and it needs to be on record before the spin begins." Daniels was silent on the other end for a few beats too long. "Where are you now?" "2 blocks from the Midtown overpass. Side of the road." Daniels sighed. "Do I want to know why?" "I was pulled over," Eric replied. "Targeted. Escalated without cause. You'll get the footage soon. Someone was recording it from their car." "Are you all right?" Daniels asked. Eric paused. "I am. But that's not the point." He ended the call with a promise to debrief later and pulled back onto the road. The city passed him by in streaks of light and shadow, but his mind remained fixed on the larger storm brewing ahead. This wasn't going to be a quiet complaint buried in bureaucratic forms. This was a fault line cracking open beneath the department's foundation. Back at his apartment, Eric dropped his keys into the dish by the door and removed his suit jacket like a man peeling off a layer of restraint. He didn't collapse onto the couch. He didn't pour a drink. He sat at his desk, turned on the lamp, and opened his laptop. Within minutes, he had drafted an incident report, not as the victim, but as the investigator. Every detail logged, every moment reconstructed. It wasn't just documentation. It was a map of misconduct. And as he typed the final sentence, he stared at the blinking cursor, knowing it wasn't just Larson who'd be answering questions. This would open the door to deeper issues. Patterns. Policies. Protection masquerading as procedure. Larson was just the match. But the system. That was the tinder. The next morning, the video surfaced. Not from Eric. Not from any department leak. From a bystander. A college student named Avery had filmed the entire stop from the car behind them. She'd uploaded it with a caption that read, "When a traffic stop gets too real. Watch what happens when the driver flips the script." By noon, it had gone viral. Over 500,000 views. Thousands of comments. Hashtags calling for justice. The department's switchboard lit up. And Officer Larson? He was summoned to Internal Affairs by 2 p.m. The department tried to get ahead of the storm with a vague statement. "We are aware of an incident involving an officer and a member of our command staff. An internal investigation is underway." But it was too late. The public had seen everything. And for once, they weren't just watching. They were demanding to know what came next. By the time Officer Bradley Larson walked into Internal Affairs, the man who had once swaggered with a holstered confidence now moved with the hesitation of someone who knew the floor could fall out at any second. Eric Porter stood waiting. Not behind a desk. Not shielded by hierarchy. He stood in the center of the room, eye to eye, level ground. His posture was the same as it had been on the side of the road. Measured, precise, and unshakable. Larson hesitated at the threshold, eyes scanning the space like it might offer him an escape route. But there was none. "Sit down," Eric said quietly. Larson obeyed. The room was still. No lawyers. No uniforms. Just two men. One who thought the badge gave him power, and one who lived the weight of what that power was supposed to mean. "You know who I am now," Eric began, his voice not sharp but sharpened. Larson didn't respond. "Do you know what my job is, Officer Larson?" Larson swallowed. "To oversee officer conduct." Eric nodded. "That's the technical part. But what I really do is look for the cracks. The small moments that expose the truth. The slips. The habits. The assumptions. You gave me all of them in 10 minutes. Larson's mouth opened slightly, but no defense came. Eric stepped forward, placing a thin folder on the table between them. "This is your personnel file. Minor infractions. A few complaints. Nothing that made it past a desk. You've been protected by the system." A pause. "But not anymore." Larson's hands clenched on his thighs. Eric leaned in, voice dropping to a calm, surgical tone. "What you did yesterday wasn't just profiling. It wasn't just an abuse of authority. It was dangerous. Because it was so casual. So easy. So automatic. You didn't stop me because I broke a law. You stopped me because I didn't fit what you thought belonged behind the wheel of a clean car in a nice suit." The silence felt like pressure in the walls. And if I hadn't been who I am, if I hadn't been trained to stay calm, to control the narrative, to document every second, what would have happened, Officer Larson? Larson didn't answer. He couldn't. Eric stood straight. "You're on immediate suspension. A review board will evaluate your conduct. But regardless of what they decide, let me be very clear, your badge doesn't make you untouchable." Then he said it, the sentence Larson would remember long after the headlines faded. "It makes you accountable." Larson's face was blank. But beneath it was a man unraveling. Because for the first time, his authority wasn't being challenged, it was being understood. Dissected. Judged not by someone beneath him, but by someone with the clarity and courage to look him in the eye and say, "Enough." Eric stepped back. "This department will change. Starting now." When Larson left the room, the hallway outside buzzed with officers. Some looked away. Others didn't. The video had forced conversations. But Eric's follow-through made them real. Weeks later, Eric stood once again at a podium. Not in a courtroom, not on a news channel, but at a police academy graduation. He looked at the rows of fresh faces, young, hopeful, uniformed. He didn't speak of pride. He spoke of restraint. Your badge is not a shield. It is not a weapon. It is a promise. One you make to every person you meet. And the moment you forget that, someone like me will remind you. The room was silent. Not because of fear, but because they knew it was the truth. And truth, like justice, doesn't shout. It stands still, while everyone else watches.